The rise of Chinese industry. Too good, too fast? Over the past 40 years, the global economic status quo has been that technological advancements have been made by well-funded companies in Europe and especially in the United States. These advancements are then transformed into commercially viable products that are manufactured in centers with lower labor costs, which mainly concerns China. These products are then exported worldwide, flooding markets with low-cost items. The West has all the high-tech jobs, design, marketing, and production of these products. Global multinational corporations have made a lot of money, consumers have obtained low-cost goods, and the country facilitating all the low-cost labor has gained a source of income to develop its national industry and provide its populations with a better standard of living than they could have achieved with basic agriculture alone. Theoretically, this was a win-win situation for everyone. However, even if the parties involved in this process had remained the best of friends, spoiler alert, they did not. There was still motivation for the low-cost export centers to claim some of those high-value roles for themselves by any means necessary. And that is exactly what happened. This has occurred in some areas of production. China is now as advanced, if not more so, than Western centers. It's no longer just about disposable junk for consumers. Sure, they still produce a lot of plastic waste that you can find on Alibaba or Wish or Tu or Shein or whatever platform is popular in the week you're watching this video. But this in many ways distracts from the fact that the country has become a global powerhouse in some of the most important fields in the world at a pace that is catching many economists by surprise. All this is happening while China is facing its worst economic conditions in decades. So, the question for them becomes whether this is a vital lifeline that could get their economy back on track, or if it is too little, too late. The question for governments and companies in the West is what they will do in either case. So, has Chinese production really become a global leader? Can the country continue to function if Western companies withdraw their operations from its shores? And finally, will greater trade restrictions be enough to curb these industries? Managing a business means handling various activities, customer relationships, inventory, accounting, and more. The last thing you need is to waste time switching from one app to another just to keep things running smoothly. That's why ODU is a game changer. ODU is an all-in-one business management platform that handles everything in one place, from CRM to keep track of your leads and deals, to automated billing to simplify your accounting, to inventory management. ODU covers it all. What's great about ODU is how it simplifies our work. The interface is super intuitive, and you can customize it to meet your specific needs. For us, the CRM has been an exceptional feature. It has made managing our sales pipeline simple, from scheduling calls to sending quotes in just a few clicks. With AI-based lead scoring, we can easily prioritize our efforts to secure the best partnerships. ODU's modular design means you only pay for the apps you need, making it flexible and affordable. Try ODU risk-free with a 14-day trial, no credit card required. If you're ready to streamline your business and focus on growth, click the link below to start your free trial of ODU today. In 1978, China introduced a new law on Chinese foreign equity joint ventures. Although progress was slow and not fully recognized by the movers and shakers until the mid-1980s, this first step allowed more foreign capital to enter the country and help develop regional economies by deregulating prices and profit retention in special economic zones to the extent that companies were allowed to establish their own wage structures. The experiment bore fruit, and the country entered its most intense period of economic growth in history. It also increased the pace of urbanization as workers were drawn from the countryside to well-paid jobs in the cities. There was enough liberalization to bring China into world trade as a notable competitor for exports. Today, China is not just a producer but the producer on the global stage. This has had a profound impact on our economies. Before China's rise, something as simple as a toaster was a significant appliance purchase that people would make with the same care they now use to buy a computer. But Chinese production has allowed people to buy many more durable consumer goods at a much lower cost for decades. The initial label, "Made in China," was analogous to low-quality sites like Alibaba. Hopefully, Teo or Shein don't help these stereotypes, but with efforts in quality control following external pressures and their growing understanding of how competition is changing, Chinese manufacturers, particularly the big players, have led some members of the press to argue that once you look past the old and shy Chinese manufacturing sector, it is a thing of the past. So, has the Chinese manufacturing sector really become a global leader in terms of both quality and quantity? Well, yes and no. When you look at economic articles online, China is still almost always behind, and this has a lot to do with financial feasibility. The International Labor Organization found that Chinese unit labor costs are about 20–40% of US labor costs. They are also low compared to costs in the EU, Japan, Mexico, Korea, and most other recently industrialized countries, not to mention those that are already established. For another thing, making $5 portable speakers doesn't make sense in places like the United States, where blind workers earn $25 an hour. This was also due to a long-standing dynamic that, at least for a while, meant not everything was produced in China. Typical advanced production was more secure from Chinese outsourcing because labor is a minor component of the total production cost of something like an airplane, which is highly technical, requires a huge amount of research and development, and places a great emphasis on how much intrinsic trust people place in the product. These jobs require much more sophisticated production equipment with fewer qualified technicians compared to something like an iPhone, where labor represents a much larger share of the final total cost of the product. It was easy to keep this type of advanced production in places like the United States and Europe because that's where the skilled workers and technical know-how were located. But if China can make these advanced products just as good or even better, even the small savings on labor costs start to look appealing. Normal human nature and global perception also play a significant role in this. I used to joke that I wasn't yet ready to fly on an airplane made in China, but recent news about Boeing means people might even prefer the Chinese airplane. The point is that for decades, China has relied on foreign outsourcing and intellectual property to earn this reputation as a global producer. So, can the country function if Western companies move their operations from its shores? The answer to this question can be found by observing China's climb up the service pyramid. It's clear that the country is the world's factory, but now it has recently promoted itself to more senior roles. Now, China is doing more advanced work like design, research and development, marketing, and management internally, where those jobs were held in the West while the country focused only on making things. This is no joke for Western economic superpowers, as for a very long time, the United States and, to a lesser extent, the large countries of Western Europe have effectively had a monopoly on global companies. But China has grown a lot in the last few decades. Until about 10 years ago, it would have been difficult to name any of their companies operating outside the nation's borders, and this is starting to change. Perhaps one of the best examples of a Chinese product that has broken through these barriers is Huawei, a Chinese multinational technology company that provides information and communications technology infrastructure and smart devices. The growth of the telecommunications company has been so astonishing to competitors that several Western nations have passed laws to curb its growth based on security risks. Many of these concerns were very well founded, which is another problem that Chinese production must address if it wants to push its companies into the global market rather than just being an assembly shop for other brands. In 2020, the United Kingdom decided to ban Huawei and other suppliers it deemed high risk from its 5G networks. Danish legislators in 2021 passed a law to allow the screening of foreign investments to ensure they do not pose a threat to national security. French authorities in 2020 told telecom operators planning to buy Huawei 5G equipment that they would not be able to renew the licenses for the equipment once they expired, effectively eliminating Huawei from mobile networks. Of course, arguing that Chinese products and services could pose a national security risk could be valid, but it also has the side effect of protecting Western companies without calling it trade restrictions. So, how exactly are these new players who are forcing their way into global markets faring? Well, at least in part, it has a lot to do with government subsidies. Organizations like the Stanford Center on China's Economy and institutions have been monitoring this development for some time. Their results show that since 2007, China has required listed companies to publicly declare direct government subsidies. Between 2008 and 2018, these subsidies increased from $4 billion to about $29 billion, according to subsidy disclosures. These subsidies were distributed for R&D innovation, industrial and equipment modernization, employment stabilization and promotion, environmental protection, and general business operations. However, it is worth knowing that this is by no means a perfect system, as the most significant determining factor for receiving direct subsidies is a larger company size, and the receipt of subsidies is linked to lower company productivity growth and only modest growth in R&D spending in subsequent years. Additionally, higher employment levels seem to be mostly temporary, so China essentially has to keep pumping money into the machine to sustain this form of growth. Another notable element is that China has a very educated population with a system that places a strong emphasis on industrial skills at all levels, and many students seek education abroad to bring that knowledge back to China. This continuous adaptation has been a top priority for the Chinese government, and just 5 years ago, they released a rather optimistic project for further development in the next decade, focusing on establishing a modern, high-quality, and balanced system for equitable and competitive education and marking a transition from capability to quality. Of course, there is also the tactic that has given China a bad reputation, a tactic that has been applied quite brazenly in almost all sectors: openly stealing. If a company produces its products in China, the conditions are that it must work with a Chinese company, and in many cases, the products that these Chinese companies are making are reverse-engineered and republished as their own with a significant cost reduction. There is actually a case involving Huawei and Aiken Semiconductor, a US-based company that developed a nearly indestructible glass promoted as the next big material for making smartphone screens more durable. They sent a prototype in the hope of getting Huawei as a client, but the terms of the contract were violated when Huawei allegedly attempted to reverse-engineer the product during the testing phases, thereby violating export control laws. This is not an isolated incident. There is an almost endless list of scandals in which Chinese companies have collaborated with Western companies only to make something of their own. Much of Tesla's production has gone to China, and now there are claims that Chinese-made Model 3s are better built than American and European Teslas. In fact, the Chinese company BYD is now the largest producer of electric vehicles in the world. Here in Australia, for example, BYD cars are already massively reducing Tesla's market share because Australia does not have a local automotive industry, so it doesn't care where it gets its cars from. The company that started by producing only batteries for other companies has built the rest of the company around this and now has good jobs in addition to production capabilities and is bringing profits back to China, not to Western shareholders. Now, all this is impressive, considering where China was a few decades ago, but there are areas that make China's success story a bit misleading. For example, much of China's growth has not been based on authentic value-added production but rather on building more houses than they need for investments. This is great for economic figures because it employs many people and adds a lot of value because average people are willing to spend a lot of money to build a house. However, it is not sustainable. The real estate market has imploded, causing a huge drop in economic growth, and economic problems like youth unemployment have become so severe that the government has simply stopped reporting such figures. But with so much growth in these other industries, the previous improvements could theoretically offset this speculative mania and give the world's second-largest economy a way to grow more sustainably. If this dream of Chinese economic progress comes true, it could be really bad for US companies, particularly in response to this. The United States can and has already put in place significant trade barriers to protect local jobs, but the United States is the world's most powerful economy because of the global reach of its companies, and it cannot really force other countries to block Chinese exports as well. What makes all this even crazier is that even with trade barriers, this export strategy works in a certain sense. China currently has the largest trade surplus of any country in history. Just in the month of June 2024, the trade surplus in China amounted to about $99 billion. For now, this is actually offsetting the losses of the paralyzed real estate sector, but it is also making other countries angry, prompting calls for trade restrictions. Naturally, one of the main arguments is that China's above-mentioned subsidies are more political than economic in nature, with some even arguing that the Chinese distort markets, leading to overproduction and the dumping of cheap products into the global market, trading hard-earned money for junk. And this is by no means a recent development. In fact, some of these concepts date back to almost 10 years ago. An example of an ongoing battle can be found in renewable energies, particularly in solar panels, again a very modern, technical, and highly valued industry at the forefront of global attention. About 7 years ago, the European Union had extended anti-dumping and anti-subsidy measures for Chinese solar panels, wafers, and cells, but it is now the present day, and it does not seem that this has made much difference. Between 2022 and 2023, exports in this sector to Europe decreased by only about 9% in terms of annual growth rates. Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Malaysia, and Pakistan all increased their imports from China by over 100% in 2023 compared to the 2022 totals, and they all joined the ranks of the major markets for Chinese panels and modules. This makes that 9% seem less like a big victory and more like a drop in the ocean, at least for now. Western resistance to the country's evolution could slow this progress but does not seem to demonstrate the ability to stop it altogether. The fact is that for many consumers around the world, something that is good enough and cheap is often preferable to something that is slightly better and considerably more expensive. But there are key internal hurdles that China still has to deal with. Besides the real estate bubble, the country also has an aging and expensive population. Even with rising wages, many Chinese residents can barely afford to live in places like Beijing. The cost of living continues to rise. In other words, this complicated socio-political deal that the Chinese people have with their government only works if things remain accessible and people can continue to make good money, which has become an increasing concern in recent years. If China can sustain its growth by eventually producing products that match the quality of other competitors with their reputation for quantity and keeping prices under control, there is currently nothing in terms of economic resistance that can stop it, except itself. Whether China will be able to pull all this off depends on whether these new developments can bear fruit. If they can manage it and regain the trust of their people, China could not only even the score but could also emerge stronger than ever. We made an entire video last year detailing the scope of the challenges posed by this industrial boom. Share your personal experience on today's topic with us. Write it in the comments and ask us any questions you may have. We will be happy to answer. Leave a comment so that we can perfect our creations. We will be happy with your simple like, but the most important thing is not to forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos.